Let's try one more time. Good afternoon. There you go. Much better, much better. All right, so this session is VMM Managed Large Data Center. Before we start, I want to make sure that you're in the right session. If this is what you're here for, you're in the right room. If you're not here to listen to VMM or how we're going to manage, two main topics we're going to cover. Number one is I'm going to talk about the improvement we made in OSD area. How do you manage host profiles, and how do you integrate the latest and greatest network management capability into host deployment process? The second part of the session, I'll be focusing around perf and scale improvement, specifically how do you manage a large environment. So if you're not here for listen to those two topics, definitely no hard feeling. Please feel free to leave. But if you're here, before I start, I really wanted to thank you for coming over to this session. I understand at the same time, there's about 10 breakout sessions and 4 hands-on labs. The reason that you decide to come to this session, spend the next 90, 75 minutes with me, shows nothing but your interest and your trust in System Center Virtual Machine Manager product. As well as hopefully by the end of the session, I'll earn your trust as well, so that you spend this next 60 minutes or 75 minutes here. Hopefully Let's see, I'll just go with this for now until I get a replacement for the mic. Hopefully by the end of the session, I'll earn your trust, accept this accident, to provide you some value on how you should configure your VMM environment so that it'll be suitable for your large environment. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the main two things we're going to talk about, one is we're going to talk about the bare metal provisioning, what's new in SP1, how do we integrate the latest networking functionality into the host profile. Associated with that topic, I'll be quickly reviewing VMM SP1 new investment. For the people who are probably not that familiar with SP1, I'll also be talking about VMM 2012 capability compared with 2012 SP1. And the second major part is, as I mentioned before, is the perf and scale. As part of that, I'll be also talking about the full stack of Microsoft private cloud solution. Can people on the back hear me all right? Thank you. As part of the second topic, perf and scale, I'll also be talking about the full stack of Microsoft private cloud solution. Specifically some new components, SPF, as well as Catal. So let's get started. How many people are using System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2012 SP1 today? Raise your hand. Wow, okay. Probably more than half of the audience. All right, and how many, for the people who are not using SP1 today, how many went to VJ session on Monday for SP1 overview? Okay, so I think we have roughly probably 25% people who are not familiar with 2012 SP1 or 2012 at all. So I'll, as I was mentioned on the subtitle, I'll make sure to cover that quickly so we can get to the meat of the content, essentially what's new. So I'll try to cover that in 5 minutes. Now, if you look at the Windows virtualization evolution over the past 5-6 years, the main point I want to highlight is, right, Microsoft Hyper-V solution really has gone a long way. I mean, you can read all the data points on your own, but I think the key message here is, with Windows Server 2012 release, we have really turned the corner, right? When you compare Hyper-V's capability with other virtualization solutions on the marketplace, from performance, from scalability, from availability, from scale, we have really, really taken on the leadership role in the virtualization technology area. Now, similarly, on the virtualization management area, right? Today, if you talk to a customer and says, hey, I have a product that can, does physical machine converting to a virtual machine, that's no longer new. Back 10 years ago, that's probably something that's rare and dear, and you can actually have a good money for that. But nowadays, you can get easily a hypervisor for free. So people are saying essentially the virtualization technology is almost becoming a commodity now, right? What's really driving all the innovation is not about the virtualization itself. Rather, how do you manage your virtualized environment, right? How do you tap into the capability of the platform underneath it? And more importantly, how do you enable your user, the infrastructure's customer, how do you enable your user to do things that they were not able to do in the past? Now, if you look at virtualization management, specifically for VMM, since 2007, this is the 5th major release for us, SP1. If you look at the capabilities that we have introduced in SP1, it's just phenomenal. Regardless, it's the performance scale that we're going to talk about next, where we support up to 1,000 hosts and 25,000 VMs, and across networking, storage, cluster management, it's a very, very comprehensive set of solutions. So for people specifically who has not even tried a VMM today, I highly, highly recommend you to take a look. Now, this is the slide that we typically show our customer to show in your customer environment, in your IT department today, what are the interactions between an app owner and the DC admin? I'm assuming most of the audience here belongs to the second category, the DC admin side, the IT or infrastructure administration part. Now, how do you interact with app owners, your business groups, or your customer, and enable them through this set of business workflow requirements? The set of products listed on the diagram, essentially those are all system-centered products. And we list out there to show you how you can enable those business processes by using system-centered products. Specifically in SP1, we introduced SPF on the very top middle column, and CATOL. Well, the official name is Windows Azure Services for Windows Server. Quite a long name. I still prefer CATOL. Now, so let's take a quick look at VMM in 2012. This is the RTM release that we released about 2 years ago. Largely, from a high level, you can break out VMM's functionality into 4 categories, right? Infrastructure, fabric, clouds, services. And under each of the buckets, on the infrastructure side, we have support for HA, highly available VMM server. We have support, obviously, VMM being one of the first products in Microsoft that fully embraced PowerShell. Today, we have 525 commandlets alone in VMM products. So we are absolutely fully embracing PowerShell. Windows PowerShell, highly recommend you to look into VMM PowerShell as well. On the fabric side, so we not only manage the Hyper-V host, but we also expanded our coverage into storage management, networking management. I'm sure some of you probably went to Hector's session on the storage management, went to Greg's session on the networking management side. On the cloud, this is where we abstract those resources, present to user in the resource pool concept, where you can offer them as a cloud service. And on top of the cloud, obviously associated with the cloud, we also offer the user role management. And on top of that, then you can offer service template, which is a concept to allow you to find a set of virtual machines and set of applications on top of the virtual machine and bundle them in one template so you can offer your customer an easy way to deploy a solution, not just a virtual machine per se. So compare with 2012 RTM, with 2012 SP1, these are the 4 major buckets that we have invested and improved on. Now, these are the 4 main categories. Performance scale is one of the key tenants. Windows Server 2012, lighting up Windows Server 2012 features, that's also a major investment area. Partner enablement, regardless, it's a storage management or network management or the UI admin console add-ins. These are the things that we added in SP1 to specifically lighten up that. Multi-tenancy management becomes a very, very key focus in SP1 as well, to support hosters, specifically hoster environment or large enterprise environment where you have this requirement to say, I want to be able to host, provide services to multiple tenants on the same physical infrastructure. So these are the high-level investment area. Now, if you look at the functionality in VMM SP1, actually, this slide goes back to 2012 RTM as well. The resource pool that we manage, right, VMM manage, can be broken down into this 4 category. Compute fabric, storage fabric, network fabric. And cluster is essentially a special type of object that encapsulate both all three resource types. But today's session, in the next few slides, we're going to talk about primarily focusing on the compute fabric management. If you're interested in storage and network, feel free to look up the recorded sessions from Hector and Greg. They have gone really deep down into detail levels, introducing our capabilities on storage and network management capability. So host deployment, what's new in SP1? Here are the main investment area that we have made in SP1 to light up or to further enhance the host management experience. Number 1 is deep discovery. Right? So in 2012, VMM 2012, what we added the capability is out-of-band management, meaning we can manage a computer through its BMC interface, baseband management controller. But managing or talking to a BMC has its own limitation. The information you can get out of a BMC is very limited because of the hardware limitation. So sometimes we get requests from customers to say, well, it will be very nice that I don't have to type in the MAC address for you. It would be very nice if you can collect the information for me. Or, more interestingly, it would be very nice if I can define the network configuration even before the OS is being laid down. So I don't have to deploy the OS first and manually go on into the OS and configure all my network cards, which is kind of the second step. And more interestingly, with the logical network definition, was logical switch supporting SP1 with different port profiles capabilities that we added in SP1. The ability to integrate, to design a template that with logical switch already integrated internally into the host template, into the host profile, is something that we light up. And in a bit, and I'll show you how does that look like and how you can take advantage of that through VMM SP1. As I mentioned before, host profile already have the logical switch definition. You can easily integrate that into your host profile. Also, we added the boot disk selection in case your physical computer has more than one local disk. Sometime in 2012 RTM, we would just automatically pick the smallest disk that can fit the largest size of the VHD, which we get feedback, people saying that we would like to select and point to a specific hard drive where we want the OS to be laid down. We add that support as well. So deep discovery, and also associated with that, the CDN. The diagram, the picture on the left bottom corner shows exactly the value for CDN. So CDN stands for Consistent Device Name. I'm not sure how many of you are taking advantage of this capability in the hardware layer. But essentially what it does is, in the past, right, you can wire the cable into the first NIC, the second NIC from the left, the third NIC from the left. But when the OS boots up, right, which one is going to be named as the Ethernet 0, Ethernet 1, it's really a guessing game. Because it really depends on how fast the bus responded to the OS query. And then the OS will assign those device names, which is really a challenge for the IT administrator to define and say, actually the first NIC of my server, I would like that to be connected to my data center network. And the third NIC on my machine, I would like to connect to the tenant network. You really can't do that until the existence of CDN, until the support of CDN. The CDN support from Windows side comes in Windows Server 2012. And VMM, immediately from SP1, we take advantage of CDN support, and I'll show you how that works in just a minute. And the picture on the right corner side, that's essentially actually what Microsoft recommends customers. If you have a new hardware, right, for Hyper-V host, we recommend you to have multiple NICs if it's possible, and you team the NICs to support, and team the NICs into different teams. And then you can create host NICs on top of that for different purpose. For example, you can have cluster heartbeat network, light migration network, and your iSCSI network in one management team. And the other team, you can reserve that for your tenant networks, right, for the VMs. And in the demo, in just a minute, I'll also show you how we can actually define a template that map exactly to that picture. So I'm going to walk you through the animated process of what deep discovery is actually going on, and I'll show you the actual deep discovery process. So in a VMM environment, you have a VMM server on the bottom left, and you have a bare metal machine on the right-hand side, and you have a WDS server on the top left corner. It's also, you can use a Pixie server as well. The first thing we do when you initiate a deep discovery, we use out-of-band control, talk to the BMC to turn on the machine. And the machine turns on, the machine is configured to Pixie boot. And then the next thing is the machine sends out Pixie boot request. The request will be captured by the WDS server. Once WDS server receives the request, the WDS server will send the SMIOS GUID down to VMM server to say, hey, do you know this guy? Is this an authorized boot from you? The VMM server says, yep, I know this machine. This machine, I've already controlled a deep discovery for this machine, so yep, authorized. Go ahead and offer this guy a WinPE image. So the Pixie server, WDS server, will send out the customized WinPE image that with VMM agent embedded in there. And the machine will boot up in this WinPE image. Once it boots up, the WinPE agent from VMM server side will start talking and collecting data on the bare metal machine. And it also send all the inventory data back to VMM. That's how, when VMM server present the data to the admin UI console on the client side, you can see those those data returned by the deep discovery process. So let me switch to my demo machine, and I can show you how does that exactly look like. So on the screen here, what I have is a System Center 2012 VMM SP1 installation. It's a very lean install. It just have a library server and VMM server and a Pixie server right now. So what I'll do is I'll hit the Add Resource Wizard, and I'll select the last option, which is bare metal machine provisioning. I hit Next, and I'll select the BMC as my BMC admin as my run as account. Essentially a very simple username and password pair. By default, we'll pick IPMI protocol. We also support Smash and DCMI as well. So for the IP range, since I know the IP address, I'm just cut and paste over here. I'll use the range. I have 2 bare metal machines there. As you can see, the initial discovery from the previous page to this page, essentially what we did was did a quick BMC query, IPMI query to those machines. Say, hey, get me your SMIOS GUID. This is the most important data point that we need. And also tell us your manufacturer, make, model, and serial number. So I select those 2 machines, and I click Next. As soon as I click Next, the deep discovery process actually already kicked out. And while the deep discovery process is going, I'm going to jump over to a different VMM server and to show you the host profile that we talked about. So on a second VMM server instance I have here, this is the fabric view. Under the fabric view, I have logical switch defined. If you went to the networking session, you would know what those means. Some logical network that's required as well. And also need to have the port profiles accordingly associated with those logical switches. With those with those artifacts created beforehand, now I can go to my library and create a host profile that take advantage of those logical switch. So if I open up this pre-created host profile, it's called my Contoso Data Center Advanced Host Profile. I'm going to enlarge a little bit. This page largely remained the same as VMM 2012. But if I go to the hardware configuration tab, this tab has changed a lot. In 2012 at RTM, the network adapter tab only have one thing you can do. You can only specify a management NIC being static IP or DCP, and that's it. But in SP1, you can actually add physical network adapters. You can add virtual network adapters. Sorry, should I zoom in? You can add different type of network adapters. And in this example specifically, what I've done is I created a management NIC, but this management NIC is a virtual NIC, it's a host VNIC. This host VNIC is tied to my data center network logical switch. Right? And how is my data center network logical switch created? It is tied to the two NICs down here, physical NIC number 2 and physical NIC number 3. Right? So these two NICs are connected to my data center network logical switch. And when I put more than one NIC, physical NIC, into the same logical switch, the effect of that is I'm creating a teamed NIC. This teamed NIC is going to be tied to this logical switch. Okay, once you put a physical network adapter into a logical switch, you cannot assign IP address on it anymore because essentially it's being extended as your virtual switch. However, you can create host VNICs on top of this logical switch. Right? So what I did was, before I go down there, I also have two other physical NIC number 1 and physical NIC number 4. These two NICs are connected to my tenant network logical switch. So essentially, going back to, if you still remember that picture with 4 physical NICs, right? 2 connects to the tenant network, 2 connect to the management network. This is essentially the configuration I'm trying to create to map to that picture. Now, on top of that, if you remember on that picture, I also have cluster network being created as a host VNIC. I also have a light migration NIC created on top of the logical switch. This is what I have here. So if you look at VNIC number 2, what I did was I created host VNIC on top of this data center network logical switch, and I applied my cluster workflow port profile onto it. That's essentially I'm going to use this for my cluster hot-B network. And for virtual NIC number 3, this is also created off the logical switch, the data center logical switch, and I apply the live migration workload host VNIC to that. The live migration port profile to that. Essentially, you can define different QoS based on the type of virtual NIC that you want to create, and that's all mapping to the logical network definition you created in the network's portion. So I think this probably is enough time for the deep discovery to complete. So let's switch back to the previous VMM session. As you can see, the deep discovery has completed successfully. If I click on the network adapter tab, what you'll be able to see that it wasn't available in System Center 2012 RTM is you will be able to see the MAC address, right? That has been pulled back from the actual physical machine. In addition to that, the name, this is the CDN that we talked about, right? And they all being pre-mapped to the logical switch definition that I put into the host profile that was applying. So imagine this. If you were to order a new rack of server, let's see from Dell, HP, IBM, any of those manufacturers, and then you tell the manufacturer, you say, I want all my machine that order from you, the first NIC, right, the CDN is going to be E1. The second NIC is going to be E2. The third NIC is E3. The fourth NIC is E4. So before even the machine comes, you can define a template just to map out, say, CDN equal to Z1, this is going to be my data center network, right? The first NIC from the left-hand side. The second NIC, E2, is going to connect to my data center network as well. I'm going to team them up and create a team NIC. And the third NIC and fourth NIC is you can do that. So before the physical machine actually arrives here, you can define a template. And once the machine arrives in your data center, just with a few clicks, you will be able to deploy all those machines with a single template. So that's essentially the power. This is the power of the deep discovery. Now, on the other VMM machine, I also have another pre-finished deep discovery record. This is actually a Dell machine. It has a lot more NICs. So as you can see, this guy actually have 6 network adapters, and all of them has CDN support. So next time when you order a new machine, make sure ask for the support of a CDN, which just can be a lifesaver, particularly when you have multiple NICs on the physical computers and you're thinking about standardizing the wirings of those machines and the network configuration for those computers. All right, so that's essentially the demo for host profile as well as deep discovery. So let me switch back to the presentation. No, I think we already talked about that. I was trying to create the same configuration to map to this diagram. And this is just a highlight of what we had talked about. You know, in the new SP1 host profile, you will be able to create a host VNICs. You'll be able to create team NICs. Oh, one thing I forgot to show you is this is the result after deep discovery. This is a different manufacturer, but you can see, right? We also have the CDNs pulled up, and the network connectivity is being pre-configured based on what's defined in the host profile. And the other thing, I think I may still have the deep discovery session open, is that you can select disk, where we can pull back all the disks that we can see through the OS, and then this is where you can select which disk you want to be using as to put down the VHD. This is also new in SP1. All right, so that covers the improvement for OSD or for the host profile. The next section, we're going to talk about perf improvement. So, as I was mentioning before, in SP1, System Center 2012 SP1, one of the key tenets we were looking at is the perf and scale. The reason we're looking at perf and scale is we have been hearing some of the customers' feedback around as soon as you start growing your environment from 2 hosts to 20 hosts to 200 hosts, from an environment of a couple of VMs to hundreds of VMs to thousands of VMs, the system's response time becomes slower and slower. And actually, as a matter of fact, so system scalability, system latency, UI performance are the 3 main areas that we have looked at. And the solution to that, or the things that we have looked at, is essentially we spend time and resource in these 3 areas: infrastructure improvement, right, engine optimization, and UI experience enhancement. And I'm going to talk about specifically where we're making changes to address those. These numbers are our SP1 perf and scale targets. And they also list out in comparison with our RTM numbers. So host, from 400 hosts that was supported in 2012, now we increased to 1,000. VMs from 8,000 to 25,000. User role has increased from 300 to 1,000. The job history has increased from 2 million to 5 million. These numbers, I know they just shows up as numbers, but when you compare with other virtualization management software solution on the marketplace, these numbers are either at par or higher than other virtualization management solution. And VMM from a system architecture point of view, this is roughly how the system is designed. In the middle is the VMM server. In the bottom we have SQL Server. This is where all the metadata are stored. VMM PowerShell essentially is the foundation for all the clients, including our admin console. SPF, if you're familiar with that, talking through VMM's PowerShell layer to VMM. And the change we have made in SP1 to allow us to up our perf and scale bars, essentially we touch a lot of components across the system. So from VMM server to SQL database to our host agent, a lot of change has been made. Now, so let's talk about for a minute for how we are testing our perf and scale solution. So what we are testing is based on what we're telling customer to do, right? One of the things that you have seen in this MMS is probably across the stack, we're talking about a hoster solution, a hoster environment. Now, on the right-hand side is all the fabric resources. You have compute, network, storage resources. You pull them into a pool. And then you have the fabric controller, which is the virtual machine manager, to control all those fabric resources. And on top of that, you have this aggregation and automation layer, which essentially is the SPF, Service Provider Foundation. And Service Provider Foundation talk to VMM through our PowerShell layer. And then on top of that, we have this Catal interface as the client that talking through SPF to VMM. Or you can also have app controllers that either talk directly with VMM or talking through SPF to VMM. So that's essentially the solution stack that, as you see today, as the Microsoft Private Cloud stack. There's also other way to look at it. Fabric stems. On top of that, you have SPF. On top of that, you have the hoster portal, which is essentially the Catal. And then tenant admins can access the portal through SPF layer to the fabric stems. And this is another view of the Catal. Essentially, the experience we want to bring to our customer is by providing a very much consistent experience as what we're providing through Windows Azure. And we're leveraging the same set of services onto a private cloud environment, onto the Windows Server-based private cloud environment. Now, in terms of going back to my question about what testing are we doing and what set of environment are we testing, this is the configuration that we're using to test internally. You see, how do we reach 1,000 hosts? How do we reach 25,000 VMs? And how do we test against a hoster architecture that we are recommending our customer to use? So again, on the very back, on the very right-hand side, you have your compute and storage and network resources. And you have 5 instances of VMM server. Each VMM instance, in this case, manage 5,000 VMs. And they aggregate through an SPF layer. Here's one SPF instance that managing 5 VMM stems. And the Catal portal is talking through the SPF and offering the service to through the tenant users. So that's essentially our test environment. And in terms of the scale numbers, what we support for SP1 is in VMM, we support 25,000 VMs across SPF, across app controller. On the user row side, on VMM standalone case, we support up to 1,000 users. On SPF and app controller case, we support up to 25,000. And Azure subscription, in terms of app controller, we support up to 20 Azure subscription. Okay, so this is a breakdown based on, if you have a hoster environment, what would be the maximum number of objects you should plan for each tenant. So we have a self-service user tenant, we have tenant admin there, we have tenant hoster admin there, right? Essentially, these are the scope of their user role. Obviously, the fabric admin, the hoster admin, essentially is the admin, the VMM admin. So he or she will have control over the entire stamp, up to 25,000 VMs, 1,000 services, or 1,000 templates. And if you're tenant admin, the maximum would be lower, will be 1,000 VMs per tenant. And then if you are a self-service user, meaning you're a single user inside of a tenant account, the maximum is 250 VMs. So next, I'm going to show you a demo of our perf environment with actually running 25,000, close to 25,000 VMs and 498 hosts. But there's a good news and there's a bad news with that. So the bad news is, since we released SP1, we have moved on to the next development. And we really cannot hold those 400 hosts. So we have since repurposed the environment. So I think today I can't show you the live demo of that environment. However, the good news is I did record, before the environment was repurposed, I did record all the scenarios I wanted to show you. So you can get a real feeling of what the real environment would look like if you had, such a large environment. And the other thing is, you folks in this room will be among the first to actually see this demo in public. This has never shown in public in the past, so that you guys will be among the first to see this. All right, so I have a video here. As you can see, that this is the VMM console. The overview section, you can see we have totally 496 hosts, 25,000, actually I think it's 24,980 VMs, something along like that. And first, I'll go to the VMs view. As you can see, the UI is still pretty responsive. I don't know how large your environment is. In 2012 RTM version, if you have VMs exceeding maybe 5,000 or maybe even 3,000, you will start seeing UI becomes less and less responsive. In this large-scale environment, if you look at this view, let's have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns per row. It's a large amount of data we're displaying there. Now, one of the first things that you do as an IT admin with such a large environment is you probably don't want to scroll down the scroll bar to find the one that you want. It's probably you want to type and search and find, right? Or sort. That's also a pain point in the past, that with the large number of rows, data point, it's really hard to search. Now, with SP1, we did some pretty awesome improvement. As you can see here, I'm just typing VM32 and host 32. The result is almost instantaneous, right? The result shows up pretty fast. The filtering is done, is really, really nice. Okay, so the next thing I did, I'll show you, is I'm actually going to show you some of the fabric components. Not sure if it was too fast, but the template, we have 1,000 template in our library. Right, and in the library, as you can see, the cursor was doing, the hourglass thing. So it is a little bit slow. I'm actually pausing the video, by the way. And as your library objects are increasing, the speed of the CPU load on the VMM server will also be impacted. So in our testing, we have actually loaded more than 1,000 library objects in our library. So the next thing I'm going to show you is actually go ahead and create a VM. And again, in a large environment, one of the complaints we have heard was that placement is great, right? Intelligent placement. You guys familiar with intelligent placement? Okay. So if you have a large environment, a large number of hosts, we have to collect all the perf counters, CPU memory, disk usage of those hosts, and pull the data off from the host into our database. At the time of placement, you say if this VM needs this number of CPU, this number of memory, this number of disk space, we have to calculate and see how many hosts meet that requirement. And then we have to mingle in the custom weight data point that customer provides and throw that into the calculation, throw that into the formula. And then at the end, we calculate one rating per host. So if you have 1,000 hosts, we have to do this calculation for 1,000 times. It's very, very CPU intense calculation. So one of the things that we got complaint on is, hey, this intelligent placement is great, but it's taking way too long. In some extreme cases, like in one of our MSIT environment where they have about 200 hosts, I think it took like 15 minutes just to do placement, which is too long for production. So as you can see, actually, this new VM wizard pops up pretty snappy. And I'm going to just use all default settings, default templates, use blank VHD just to show the purpose. The thing, I'm not sure if you noticed that. Actually, what I did was I selected all hosts instead of selecting a subgroup or host group. Because that's certainly the worst case scenario, right? If you select a host group or a cloud that has a less number of hosts, obviously the calculation will be faster. But if I select all hosts, that's probably the worst case scenario. So I select all hosts. Essentially, the calculation will be done for all 496 hosts. Actually, I'm pausing the video just to do a quick show of hand. How many people think it will come back in 1 minute? No one. 30 seconds. No one. Okay. All right. I do see Western is raising his hand because he is actually one of the customers complaining the most. As a matter of fact, I think it's about 5 seconds where you start seeing results coming back. This is, again, a calculation against 496 hosts with very extensive calculation. Now, folks, I'm not sure if you're noticing that. The way how we are doing placement now is not doing the whole batch and returning the whole batch back. We're actually doing them in batches. So in the sense, you will see incremental result coming back. Sometimes our customer telling us, hey, you don't really have to do everything and then rank the whole thing and give us the top ranked host. As long as you tell me one host that's suitable, I'm going to be just moving on with that, right? So that's what we did. As you see on the previous slide, on the previous page, what I did was, as the result coming back, I just picked one and I can move on. I don't have to wait for the placement calculation to complete. So that's that. And I'll just go ahead and click through that and hit create. So that was the VM creation. The one last thing I want to show in this large environment, where I also show you in a smaller environment, is a complaint about VMM console being not responsive. Not responsive, not meaning that I click on page, it doesn't show me the page content. Rather, it's not responsive to out-of-band changes. For example, right? If someone changed the VM state outside of VMM, let's see my tenant just turn off or shut down this VM. It took some time in VM 2012 RTM. It takes minutes, hours, days. Sometimes it never actually shows the actual state of the VM, which is very, very frustrating, right, for a large environment. Now, in VMM 2012, SP1, we significantly improved how the synchronization is done. So in this case, if you notice in this specific host 148, right? And you notice there's a VM on the very top, this one, if you can see that. This VM. And what I'll do is I'll actually go ahead and open up the Hyper-V console, and I'll should delete that VM from the Hyper-V. And we'll see what happens in VMM console side. So as you noticed, I'm deleting the VM from the Hyper-V console, right? The VM is gone. And immediately, almost immediately, in the VMM console, it shows this VM being missing as well. So in the past, it used to take like minutes and days and hours. This is almost instantaneous. Now, so this is the video I'm actually going to show you for this large environment. Now I'm going to actually show you a real demo where I have two environments, right? This is 2012 VMM RTM environment. On the right-hand side, you see this is the VMM console. On the left-hand side, you see is actually a Hyper-V host that this VMM server is managing. right? As you see, this is the same name as this computer here. Now, on this host, I have 5 VMs. All of them are turned off right now. The same thing is showing on the VMM console side, right? All right. And on this environment, which is 2012 SP1 environment, I also have one host, a single host. I got also 5 VMs here. They're all stopped, right? On the left-hand side, this is the 2012 Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V console. I also have showing up the 5 VMs that are turned off. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to actually turn 4 of the machines on, and we'll see how fast each console responds to this out-of-band change, right? Okay, so I'm going to do this on the RTM side first, just to give RTM a little bit leg up. And see, start. So it'll take this console probably a little bit of time to respond, so I'm going to switch back to this guy. I'm going to say start. Notice I'm starting the VM on the Hyper-V side, right? And then on the VMM side, we should be seeing the status changing. There we go. So it's changing to running. And back to the RTM side, this VMM console is still waiting. In about probably 2 or 3 minutes, the change will be picked up. This is because this environment is actually pretty small. We only have 5 VMs in this environment. If you have a large environment, it could take, minutes or hours or even days. So this essentially, the snappiness of the UI, and actually the UI is only one factor that you're seeing of the improvement. The improvement is throughout the stack, from the UI to the PowerShell layer, to the WF layer that is calling PowerShell, to the VM server, and to the VM server calling the database, to the database server that calling the store procs. So we made significant improvements around the performance scale. So highly recommend you guys to take a look at SP1 if you have not done so. All right, so we're going to switch back to the slide deck. Now, the last section I want to talk about is best practice in terms of how, if you have a large environment, what are the things that you should do and you should not do to make sure that your system performs at the optimal level. Number one is make sure you use remote SQL. The reason is actually bullet number 3 there, because both VMM and SQL are pretty CPU intense. In our large-scale testing, in this 400 and 500 host, 25,000 VM environment, we noticed that CPU is typically the first thing that will hit the threshold. So make sure you have a remote SQL server, data log disk, fiber channel SAM, because for SQL server is actually also pretty I/O intense. That's one. The second one, hosts. SP1 is definitely optimized for Windows Server 2012. But I understand that your environment may also have Windows Server 2008 R2, SP1. That's okay. But be sure that you install WMF 3.0. Stands for Windows Management Foundation 3.0. What it gave VMM is the ability to do eventing support. Remember the fast response from the out-of-band change to VMM console? All those are enabled by eventing model. In 2012 RTM version, we're doing pull model, meaning that however objects are there, we're going to have to pull one at a time. That's time-consuming, CPU-consuming. That's not efficient. In SP1, we changed the model from the polling model to eventing model, meaning that you don't bother me until there's something changed in your environment, in the host, and then you only send the change to me. Right? So make sure you have WMF 3.0. But also to note is that if you install the WMF 3.0 RTM version, there is actually a bug in there where it will break VMM. So make sure you install the KB article there, the KB 2781512. Install WMF 3.0 with the KB in the Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1 host. You will enjoy the same set of snappiness performance you have for Windows Server 2012. Now, I think we already talked about the third bullet point. The fourth one, SQL is both CPU and memory. Oh, we talked about that one as well. Scale out SPF. Remember the Catal SPF VMM architecture? SPF is bounded by the request per minute. So I often get questions that ask me, hey, Chung, how do I plan for how many SPF instances I need to have in my environment? I really can't answer that question because it really depends on the throughput requirement that you have. You may have 1,000 users, but if they only doing one request per day, you're not going to need a lot of SPFs. But you may only have like 20 users, but they're like hacking or they're pumping through the UI, they're pumping through the portal to do things. Then you may need more than one instance of SPF. Okay, so that the actual number per instance is, I think the number is 1,000 requests per minute. So you need to measure and do some sort of prototype, put some measurement in your environment to measure how large is your throughput, and then from there you can plan out how many instances you need. Placement we talked about, right? The new enhancement of we're going to return results in batches. If you don't need the full results, use the return first. This is a one parameter we added in the commandlets. So if you're calling through our commandlets, make sure you use that parameter. Will get the result back fast. Multiple libraries for load balancing. That's also important. I actually included a snapshot, a screenshot on the right-hand side. Probably this is one of the useful features that's hidden that people don't get to use them a lot. This is the property dialog for the library server. You can actually associate this library server with certain host group, right? One of the scenarios that we recommend some of our customers to do is, for example, if you have a global data center, you have a New York site, San Francisco site, Houston site, and each site could be a host group. And you can associate a library per that host group. In that case, when we deploy VMs to that host group, we will prioritize that library first, right? And there's also functionality in being a library is called equivalency. You can create or copy the same set of resources, library resources, in multiple library servers, and then mark them being equivalent. But when you associate the library with certain host group, when you deploy VM to that host group, that library will be used first, so that you can save on intercontinental network traffic or delayed network copy and things like that. Lastly, certainly not leastly, use HAVMM. This is new. It's not really new in SP1, but in SP1 we actually fixed quite a few things. Now HAVMM really works pretty well, fairly stable. So you should definitely consider that for highly availability. And this is the capacity planning data. I'm not sure if you guys have been checking TechNet or not. I believe this data is already published, but we have been asked for this data for a long time. So finally, this is out, and this is also the set of configuration we use internally when we test our environment. I know some of you probably a little surprised on the number of cores we may require for a large environment, but yes, VMM and SQL Server are pretty, again, CPU-intense workload. That we do require a lot of CPU cycles and memory. And these are the related sessions for VMM. And I guess I have 20 minutes left for Q&A. By the way, this is our VMM team picture if you haven't seen all of them. This is not all, actually. We also have additional team down in Silicon Valley. We also have some team members in India. But Vijay is in the middle. Greg is in the second row. I'm in the third row. If you went to Hector's session, Hector is on the top right corner. If you know Jonaby, the red hair on the right-hand side. Anyway, any questions? Let me see if I get your question. Your question is, if you have a global site, global data center, do we recommend you use multiple sites? Okay, so do we recommend using multiple VMM instances or using one VMM instance but managing them in different host groups? Right, is that your question? Yeah, so I think it really depends on your environment. If you have low latency network connectivity between your global sites, right, you can certainly manage your global environment with one VMM instance. I think if all equal, I would choose to use one VMM instance because then you can have one place to go to see your global resources, right? And it's probably also easier for you to manage from policy and user role control point of view. But if your latency is too high across your global sites, there may be an issue when you manage using one instance of VMN. Let's see, if we were to migrate workloads, or if you were to deploy certain things where you don't have library server local, that could be an issue. That could cause, unintended failures. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Going once, twice? Thanks for coming.